Some games have really good ideas, but sometimes good ideas aren't enough. This indie developer sent their game to me for feedback, and while I played it, I had actually a lot of fun, but the more I played it, the more I felt like I was improvising. So first we'll take a look at how that happened, and then we'll look at what the developer was actually trying to accomplish. My name is Devon. This is Games Over Qualia. So this is Hovershot. This is developed by Yaniv. I don't know if I'm saying that name right. It's Y-A-N-I-V. You are a spaceman of sorts that is floating around in the space area, and you have a gun and you can shoot, and every time that you shoot forward you recoil backwards, and the whole point of the game is to navigate, shoot enemies, and find the exit. When someone plays this game, immediately I think they're going to have fun. But I remember playing the tutorial of this game and thinking it definitely doesn't feel like a tutorial. It felt like a easy level, and I think that speaks to the game's kind of design language, if you will. When playing the game, it never feels like I'm being taught anything. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but if you think about what games do, one of my favorite examples is Banjo-Kazooie. So if you haven't played Banjo-Kazooie, it's an N64 game, and it's a collectathon. What a collectathon is it's just collecting a lot of things. And that sounds kind of boring, but when you play a game that's quote unquote designed for that kind of stuff, it makes a lot of sense. What Banjo-Kazooie does really, really well is it has its levels kind of made so that the player goes along the levels and they start collecting things, but it feels fun to collect, and it feels like it's the point of the game. You go over to see a bridge somewhere, and you walk along the bridge and you're like, oh, hey, there's an item there. I'm going to grab that item. And while you're looking around there, oh, there's an item over there. I'm going to go grab that item. And I wonder what's over here. And you go around and you find something else and you're like, oh, wait, there's something else. It's this sense of continuously pushing the player toward finding things. And it sounds kind of silly, but when you're, actually playing the game, it makes a lot of sense. It's this kind of thing that we call a gameplay loop. The point of the game is coming through as they play. Super Mario Bros. Is another wonderful example. It teaches people the main thing that you do in the game, which is known as platforming, right? When you can run and you can jump, that's platforming. If you were to make a game where a person just runs and jumps, what kind of enemies would you say you would put into that game? Because Mario is a staple and it's very historic, everyone kind of understands exactly what I mean when I say enemies inside of Mario. People can picture that in their mind. They're like, okay, if I'm making a game like Mario, I'm going to make enemies in which you hop on them. But that's not always the default, right? So if you think about Sonic the Hedgehog versus Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. Is made for a specific type of experience. So the player starts running with Mario and can jump, right? And that's the whole point of the game, is to run and jump. And when you have the enemies there, what you're trying to do is tell the player, hey, you need to run and jump to vanquish these enemies. So that's what you do. You have Goombas, which the only way to vanquish them is to hop on them, right? You have your Koopas, which are those little turtle guys, and you can hop on the Koopa in order for them to go into their shell. And now you have another thing you can do, which is either hop on them again or approach them from either side. Sonic has a different kind of thing, but it still speaks to the same kind of teaching kind of thing, where the player is trying to go forward as fast as possible. And in Sonic the Hedgehog, you can go as fast as possible. And whenever you get to an enemy, you don't hop on them. You can just hit them in any direction. And what that does is it preserves your kind of momentum, right, as you're going forward. So that kind of thing, where you have enemies that kind of, teach the player and kind of show the player, this is how you should be playing the game. That's kind of the thing that I'm talking about here. Hovershot has kind of a core experience, but it doesn't really seem interested in teaching that core experience to its player. So what I would say the core experience probably is in here is just to shoot, to navigate, and not necessarily to shoot to engage. It feels like those two kinds of things that you're doing are kind of fighting against each other, specifically because when you're shooting in this game, it sends you backwards. You can see in the gameplay that I'm typically using my shots to try to get out of the way from other enemies. It's a difficult thing to have, the main thing that you're doing in the game, shooting enemies, but also the main thing that you're doing is trying to get around the enemies, and you're doing it at the same time. And they're not exactly the same. And so I want to, ask this developer what the core experience that they thought they wanted in this game. What was the what was the fun thing about your game that you made it for, right? When you made this game, what was the thing that kept bringing you back? And that might seem a little unfair to people who know what this type of gameplay is. Because to me, what this kind of gameplay is feels like what I would call a simulation-like type of game. And that's different than what I was talking about, which is designed games. This game could be this kind of simulation type of game. What a simulation type of game is where you have just things that you can do within like a sandbox type of area. In Minecraft, there's a lot of stuff that you're doing that's just kind of an open world that you just do a bunch of different things. And no part of Minecraft is the single core experience. You are, mining for sure, and that, the whole point of the game, I guess you could say, is to find, collect, and build, right? That is kind of the stuff that you're doing in Minecraft. But a lot of it is just, it's presented in this kind of open kind of area where you're not really guided. There's no design, there. And so in the same sense, I would say that this game, Hovershot, has that kind of simulation kind of feeling to it, where it feels like when I'm playing the game that there's a bunch of elements that just kind of exist, but for some reason it's being pushed into this kind of designed kind of structure, I guess you could say, of the game. And it's very odd to me. So some of the things that makes me think that this game wasn't really designed, but then might be, I'm not exactly sure, is the enemies themselves. There's some enemies that have some interesting designs in here. You have ones that, follow the player, but the player has to shoot at the enemy. But at the same time, when you're being followed and you're being shot backwards at the same time, it feels a little weird, especially if the enemy, if they're following you and then they stop and you're just continuously shooting, because your bullets have decay times, which means that if you shoot a bullet, then it stops at a certain point and it just disappears. And of course, the more you are shooting, the more you're going backwards, which means the less your bullets are traveling. So it kind of feels like it works against you at that point. There are other enemies that are designed really intentionally, so it seems. There's one that has a giant shield on the front that protects it, and then it's vulnerable from the back. So it makes you think, oh, I should get around the enemy and shoot them from the back. But the enemy turns at the same speed that you move, so you can't. And sometimes you can if you're sneaking up on it, but it turns pretty fast. And then its shield can break. There's also an enemy that has a giant spike in its stomach that feels like some kind of mutant, and it moves really, really fast. It just kind of stays there for a second. It's like a sentry, right? Sentry. It stays there for a second, watches where you are, and then as soon as it finds you, then it shoots towards you really fast. And that doesn't seem fair in this respect, because you can't move very fast. And so the only thing you can either do is you try to move out of the way, which is difficult, or you can shoot at it. And you can kill it if you have a powerful enough gun. But if you don't, then you're out of luck and you're just going to get hit. It's one of those things that it's just really strange to me that these enemies exist just for them to exist. It doesn't feel like they're inviting any kind of core element. It doesn't feel like it's telling the player to do anything, and this is what I mean by the design structure of the game, where it doesn't really feel like those, Goombas in Mario, where it says, hey, you need to jump on us, That's what I mean by design versus simulation. The whole idea when you're moving around is that you don't want to get hit by the enemies for sure, but you also can't get hit by the walls. You don't want to send yourself colliding into a wall because it'll hurt you. And what's really neat about this is if you think about that aspect of the game and you try to reverse engineer it into creating a character that makes it feel as if you can't do that kind of stuff, what would that character look like? I think about that skating game, Skate Story. Your skater is made of glass, and it tells you immediately, I should not fall off my skateboard. In the same way, you look at the character in this game in Hovershot, and your head is not a human head, right? You are a goldfish inside of a little glass bowl. And it makes you think, oh, I should not hit the walls very much. And it's really cool that they have that. You have two types of health in this game. You have your body health, which degrades when you get shot, and you have your head health, which also can get shot, but also you don't want to slam against the walls. I put this game into the Discord for a little bit to see if there was anyone who would play it. And there were some people that posted their gameplay, and I was very, very grateful for them. What they showed was something that I was suspecting, which was this strategy of going toward the walls. What would happen is, like, whenever a player would do that, they have to twist their body so that their feet hit the wall. And it turns out that that's actually a mechanic that the developer had wanted to reinforce, and they're not reinforcing it, I don't think, in any way, really. The only way that I know that they're trying to reinforce it is because there's an upgrade that lets you bounce further from the wall by using your feet. You have to rotate your character a little bit in order to hit the wall. What's weird about that is that it's a 90-degree angle that you're rotating, because you're shooting forward and your feet dangle from 90 degrees from your, it's a right angle that you're shooting from. And so because of that, what you're doing is you'll shoot a whole lot. You'll go backwards, and then you'll end up going to a wall. And now you have to rotate yourself 90 degrees so that you stop, and then you rotate 90 degrees again, and and you go shoot some more. And what's weird about that, it feels so arbitrary. And I think it is arbitrary. I think what happened is the developer put this into the game, and they felt like, oh, you know what, that's pretty cool. I can do that. I'll go ahead and add some upgrades for the player to do that. But I don't understand the reason as to why it's there, other than it just feels like it's there in the game, and it just exists as something that you can do. And there doesn't seem to be anything to reinforce that other than that little upgrade. And that goes for everything that you do here. There's a strategy that I had in this game where I would shoot at a 45-degree angle in order to run circles around my enemies. It was weird to have a bunch of those things just kind of existing here within the space, and it doesn't feel like any of them are acknowledged. So every time that a game developer submits a game, I go ahead and ask them 3 questions about the intentions of their game. I then play their game and then compare my first experience with their intentions. Question number 1 was, what were you hoping that the player would feel while playing your game? Their answer was, I wanted the player to feel a mix of curiosity, tension, and satisfaction. Exploring the world, learning its mechanics, and slowly mastering movement and combat is meant to feel rewarding. I also hope the atmosphere pulls the player in and makes them want to keep going, even when things get challenging. My second question was, why did you choose this experience? Their answer was, I chose this experience because I love playing games with interesting mechanics and challenging gameplay. I enjoy the feeling of discovery, where each small step forward comes from understanding the game a little better. I wanted to create a game that delivers those same feelings. Question number 3 was, what were the specific moments, mechanics, or ideas that you built around that emotional goal? Their answer was, I wanted to create curiosity and exploration through mechanics that are unusual, so players have to experiment and learn. The game has random weapons and abilities that players need to figure out, and different enemies that behave in unique ways. Tension comes from battles which require focus, and satisfaction comes from beating a boss or a level, doing something clever with the mechanics or weapons, unlocking a new ability, or discovering fun weapons. So learning is a huge thing in game design, and I think the way that the dev is talking about learning here is a little different than the way that I would typically hear the term used in this subject. Whenever someone talks about learning, it usually implies teaching. What I imagine this dev meant is discovery as opposed to learning. Yeah, you can learn the game, playing the game over and over and over, and you start to learn lots of the game's quote-unquote idiosyncrasies. Then it makes sense that you would build your own kind of understanding of the game, and you would start to learn it a lot more. But if I'm thinking about learning in terms of game design, I'm thinking about trying to understand the mechanics in the way that the developer wants you to understand them. So let's think about a game like Rocket League. In Rocket League, the whole game is cars that are playing soccer, right? That have big fat jet engines that you can use to rocket all over the place. And the idea of that game is just very easy. There's been a lot of things that people have understood about the game from playing it so many times that they start to understand the game at like a meta type of level, and they start exploiting the game's mechanics. They start exploiting the systems and the themes that are involved in order to do things that the game developers never intended. And I'd say that's this kind of discovery that's happening. This is something we call emergence. When you see that happen in Rocket League, we have now like meta mechanics, things that happen within that game that people have done that developers have never intended, like the air dribble which is really, really strange. It's when a person can take the soccer ball and they can fly with the ball across the air and put it into the net. It's like something insane to do. And I've seen people do this when I play the game. There's another, other types of emergent mechanics would be like in Super Smash Brothers when we have wave dashing, right? Wave dashing is a crazy thing where you're exploiting the animation frames, the canceled, quote unquote, canceling animation frames of the characters themselves in order to utilize that as movement. And I'm wondering if these unintended mechanics were intended from this developer for Hovershot, because it seems like what they want to do is they want the player to kind of learn the systems through their own discovery and kind of just produce different types of strategies in order to deal with the world that they've created. It's really strange to me, but that is something that can happen for sure. And this is why I kept kind of comparing this to a simulation type of environment, because it feels like that's what the developer is saying here. We have this fun world that he just wants people to go into and learn all these really weird things and then take advantage of the systems and try to understand the systems at a personal and expressionist kind of level and just kind of do things the way they would want to. And it makes the game really interesting, but it also makes the game really, really hard to master because there's nothing really that the player is being pushed toward. There's no skill that the developer is saying, yeah, this is what you should be doing here in the game. It's interesting because these types of, physics-based movements and mechanics and everything, the things that happen in this game, they can be taught. It's not like they can't be. And this may be, not what the developer is interested in, but think about games like Half-Life 2 or Portal, for example. Those games have, physics types of movements that are not necessarily things that you have to do. For example, there's a moment I remember in Half-Life 2 where you're coming down a little hill, you bump into a little barrel, and the barrel rolls down the hill, and then it catches on fire. When the barrel is on fire, it happens to run into these big tongues that are hanging from the ceiling, and you realize that they're monsters and that they have some sort of trap there. And so they suck up the barrel, and then it explodes and dies. And it basically shows the player an example of something that could be happening. They say, hey, this is something that you could do. You could push these explosive barrels into these, monsters and make them blow up. This game, I think, could use a lot of that type of same things within Half-Life 2. The game itself doesn't really have quote-unquote levels, because Half-Life 2 is basically like a story type of game and narrative that's happening, but they're split off into different sections, even chapters, I guess. And during those chapters, they have these open kind of areas that are kind of like mini sandboxes. And within those areas, they give the player, very specific tools, like I said, with the barrels and the tongues, or the soda can, right? Moments like those where you have, these sectioned off little areas where the player can mess around with the things that they have and just kind of figure out what kind of skill they should be building. I think this game could definitely do that. Portal is another great game that shows this kind of stuff where it never really tells the player how to use the portal gun very specifically. It says use the portal gun to do certain things, like, you can move your cube from one place to another, but it never says, push the cube through the portal at this angle at this moment in time. It never does that, right? It's just kind of giving the player these kind of puzzles with this open-ended kind of thinking, that they can just tell the player to acknowledge these things, I guess. A lot of these systems I would call creative. In a game like Tears of the Kingdom, you can have these very, very open-ended type of systems. There are times that you have to understand how to play the game, one of those things being the Ultra Hand. And when you're using the Ultra Hand in order to move things around and then like glue things together, one of these things that happens is there's this big kind of zip line looking thing. It's just a line that goes from one area to another. And then it shows you these little metal blocks that are just right in front of it. And the little metal blocks have the little hooks on them. And the player goes, oh, the hooks should go onto the zip line and I'll use that to ride it. They don't have to do that. They can just walk on the zip line if they wanted to all the way down. They could make something else entirely, right? They can make their own angle and put it on. But the point is to imply that there is a skill for the player to use in order to get from one side to another. And I think you could do that in Hovershot, right? I think you can make the player realize that there are things that they can do through a bunch of different things. You can do them through, you know, creating your levels in a certain way, or creating your enemies in a certain way to tell the player or imply that there are certain behaviors that are expected from the player in order to, you know, progress forward. Meta mechanics reminds me of players stacking up Halo 2 multiplayer, jumping and then getting extra jump height by jumping off the other player's heads. Yeah. I feel like you can pick this up and start playing very quickly, but also fairly quickly start to wonder why you would keep playing it from watching so far. Yeah, it's one of those things that I figured when the player would play the game, I could imagine, I could see giving this game to a friend of mine. They would play it for a little bit and go neat and then walk away. And that's kind of it. And it's because there's no I guess, challenge progression. There's no kind of skill progression here. This game also looks like a game called Shot for the Stars. I have not heard about that. I really, really enjoyed this game. I thought this was so much fun. I really loved the absurd weapons that you have. I really liked how using them to get around all had different ways of, you know, recoiling. Anyway, that is everything. So thank you again for being here. Thank you so much for watching. This last video that you saw was an edited version of a stream. If you want to engage with the stream next time, you can check it out. We have them, I try to do them weekly. I announce them here on YouTube, but I also announce them on the Discord. There's a Discord link in the description if you'd like to go into there and chat with other developers about games and have your game playtested if you want, or playtest others. So that is all I have to say. I will talk to you guys later. Peace.